In this video, we'll be looking at a yin-yang phenomena from several different perspectives through the general paradigm of polarity. First one is integrity and disintegration, integrity and corruption, sustainable and unsustainable, the one and the system, or the many, the dots, the particles used to construct the sphere that represents the one. To create and to sabotage, correlating to life and death, and also truth and lies. So let's start with truth and lies. To tell the truth is in of itself is a lie, because words are not the truth. They are symbols of the truth. You have an underlying reality, and then we all agree that certain mouth noises will be appended through memory, primarily, through association. It's guilt through association. So we're going to append this sound exclusively for this object. Well, in that hierarchy of reality, the object is the reality, the word is the symbol of reality. So we're going to append this symbol. Now this sound is now reserved. It's off limits. It's for this. The word table is reserved for these types of things and nothing else. So we've created an association. Well, the association itself is a certain kind of lie, because we often pretend in the emphasis on head-based cultures that the symbol is the object, that the word is the underlying truth. We particularly do this, around human states and please and thank you, etc. We don't actually pay attention to the underlying reality of gratitude or ambivalence or hostility. We pay attention to the form, to the symbol of that. Did you say thank you is more important than whether you felt it. And so if you felt thank you and were overjoyed, and it was just a very inward experience and you didn't get around to saying it, that is a crime. But if you felt disgust and hostile but put on a polite show and bowed down and said thank you, well then that's satisfied. And here we have the split of chauvinism, the elevation of the yang, the diminution of the yin. The form is more important than the substance. And in this way, language becomes very important. And so what's generally considered to be the lie is the editing of language without the editing of the underlying substance. Now, if you edit the language and then edit the underlying substance, there's no problem. If I say, here is a bag of 300 ounces of gold, and I then go and get a bag and put 300 ounces of gold in it, then I've substantiated, I've shored up with the underlying reality, the symbol, which is the gold, or the words for gold. However, if I bring 300 ounces of gold and do not want to deal with that further, then if you ask, well, could you bring me 600 ounces of gold? And I don't want to go to the effort of securing that, but don't want to experience conflict. I don't want to deal with the effort of the conflict, and I don't want to deal with the effort of securing the underlying reality. So I can now tell a lie. I can corrupt the relationship between the underlying asset and the symbol. And I can say, sure, no problem. I just delete on the receipt 300 and put 600 and say, don't worry, it's all there. I can carry the lie further. If you come back and say, well, here is 300 ounces. I've counted them. Here's 100, here's 200, here's 300. There's another 300 ounces missing. I can then say, no, this is definitely 300 ounces. And I can say, let's just count, 1, 2, 50, 200, 3. It's all 600. It's all there. We can, we can continue the lie further. Commit this person to an insane asylum. Here's 600 ounces of gold, which is evident because I said so. I have some rank, and so put this person in prison or in an insane asylum for arguing with my words, since I have the rank, and I'm assigning this symbol. And so you have the first issues of corruption of power, because the power is presumed to reside in the masculine role of leader. To follow is feminine, to lead is masculine. In a chauvinistic paradigm, it is presumed that the power lies with the leader. This is not scientific. Try and lead an army into battle where none of them move. Meaning, a leader has zero power or influence on a group of people who will not be led. So you could say quite the opposite. It doesn't matter who the leader is if you have competent followers, because a competent follower will not follow the areas in which the leader is incompetent. But a competent follower will follow the areas of the leader in which they are competent, in which case the leader is completely irrelevant. You just have competent followers who have enough discernment to say, no, I'm not going to do what you say here. But yes, I'll do a little bit of what you say there, and I'll do a lot of what you say there. What I will follow is the underlying mathematics of science and well-being that you as a leader are doing your best to articulate, but you're not a very competent leader. And so thank goodness we have our own views and know how to think. But you have the corruption of power, or the perceived corruption of power, when you have a combination of incompetent followers and incompetent leaders colluding to warp the relationship between the symbol and the underlying reality. So we have integrity with, let's say, a bridge. When all of the materials in a bridge are functioning with integrity in their relationship with themselves and in the relationship with one another, you have a strong bridge that has structural integrity. Now, if rust invades the steel or iron straps that are bolted together in triangular fashion, if rust engages and permeates that structure of iron or steel, then the material loses integrity with itself. It becomes corrupted by rust, a foreign pattern. When you have the corruption of the underlying materials, even if their relationship is sound, if they are corrupted, then the bridge loses structural integrity. And at a certain point, at a certain stress point, the bridge will dissolve. It will disintegrate and cease to be a bridge that can be used to to transport energy across. We have to create something and to sabotage something. So we have these polarities of creativity and sabotage. And we have to be born and to have life, and we have death. So what we're looking at is kind of some of the different dances between these ideas. For example, when we create something, we always destroy something else. If we make a choice, I'm going to walk down 4th Street. In order to make that choice, we have to rob the probability field of all the other choices that could have been walked down. So if there are 100 streets in the vicinity, that's the probability field of going for a walk on a street. Now, when you pick one street, the probability field shrinks to the actuality field, and all those probabilities have been robbed of their probability, of their energy. It's now all converged on one path. To give life to one actuality is to murder a very large probability field that is far more large than we tend to realize, because the process of convention, the habit of walking on streets rather than zip-lining down power lines or taking off in a jet suit and navigating the same terrain, or crawling through gardens and over fences, or walking backwards, and there's all these different things that are just not conventional. And so when we say go for a walk, it would tend to be on a sidewalk, on a street, in the adjoining area. And so that probability field might be relatively small, just 100, but still, as we go from 100 down to 1, 99% of the probability field is destroyed in order for 1% of the actuality field to continue to be given life. So to create is to destroy. To be born is also an induction into an actuality field, and a death of that which was there before. Just as to die, if you follow the molecules, if you follow the atoms, after any death, you see there is no death, there is change. There is metamorphosis. There's something that occurs when you put a body 3 feet into the ground, and worms and microorganisms enter that body and roots from the plants above and around enter that body and consume the potent nitrogen that is in the blood, you will find green leaves, greener leaves, representing the place. So a failing body becomes a successful tree, as one form becomes another form, becomes another form. The cycle of life and death is only from a particular point of view. If we look at reincarnation as a paradigm and we see, you're born when you arrive, and you're dead when you go. And of course, you have the life cycle of, the nutrients that's uptaken by the surrounding plants in a healthy natural grave where we have not separated the natural life cycle with concrete boxes and the like. Then we will see green leaves marking the death of a body. But even, just in the reincarnational cycle, it looks like someone is gone and then they come back. But what's happening on the other side of that veil, on the other side of that partition? When someone goes, they arrive. Meaning if we look at the same pattern of a guest coming and going in a rhythm. So the guest arrives at your house, and then they leave your house. But as they leave your house, they arrive somewhere else. And then they leave somewhere else, and then they arrive at your house. And so what is a death in one shape and form becomes a life in another shape and form. A death in one shape and form, a life in one shape and form, a life in one shape and form, a death in one shape and form. It's interconnected. Well, we start off with the unconscious sphere. The infinitely rich, diverse, sustainable ecology of the One, of which all things are a part before there are parts. That's when everything is one, before there are parts. And the parts come through language. Before there is language, which means before there is thought, because all thought is observed and experienced through language. So before there were parts and before there was language, there was the One. The interconnected dance of all things with all things in a sustainable ecology that is. And the One was cut into two. This is metaphorically represented in the knowledge of good and evil, black and white, up and down. The One becomes cut into two so that we can have thought, so that we can have language, so that we can have polarity, so that we can have relationship between polarity, so that we can have sex. If you do not cut the One into two, there is no sex. Because sex is the multidimensional relationship between the illusion of polarity created through language, which generates thought, distinction, and awareness that says, there's this part and there's this part. There's up and there's down. We've cut the world in half. Now, we now have a binary system. We now have two halves. And this is how the one, which is the experience of the world as an unconscious, interconnected ecological feminine state. This is how the one becomes many. The divided, distinct, conscious, linguistic, masculine state of the system. Because once you have two, you now have a probability field of how the two can and cannot relate. And you can measure the distinctions in that probability field, and that is your system. You now have dots and lines connecting parts of the original circle back together again. You now have a system of words and a system of thought through which to perceive the reality that is revealed through that system. Now, this leads to the greatest crisis of every system, which is that every system has a remainder. You know, in long division, you take 7 divided by 3, you get 2, and then you have a remainder of 1. Well, 7 divided by 3 leads a remainder of 1, 1/7. That 1/7 in that equation, in that system, is the outcast, is the rebel, is the violation, is the taboo, is the scapegoat, is the unknown. It's outside of the paradigm. A paradigm is a frame, and its benefit is that it shines insight and illumination on what can be seen through the frame. But the cost is it obscures all the reality that was probable before you applied that frame. Because if you apply this frame, you create this reality. If you apply that frame, you create that reality. The paradigm takes all of the probable paradigms and it creates reality by looking through a certain lens at a certain piece of reality. We have this little dance here, but what about what's going on out here? That's the price. You don't know because we're focused here. Now, the system itself is a lie, meaning it formulates what we're conscious of, because if you just think sphere, we're all one, we're all part of the sphere, and everything is because it is for all time in all space, and it's all one. You now have complete unconsciousness, because that's too big to grasp. It's not like you're aware of every distinct little star in the universe and every atom in your body. It's just like blah. You've gone back into unconsciousness. And one of the journeys of human consciousness is to go out of that interconnected oneness into the illusion of the particle, the illusion of separation, and experience as many distinct forms as possible. Scotch tape, duct tape, canned peaches, fresh peaches that are ripe, fresh peaches that are sour, this experience, to create diversity and complexity of consciousness, so that in the exit from life, in the return to that sense of unity, that there's more of a sense of a bigger world constructed through distinctions. Because when you go from that world of complete unity and interconnected ecology, where we are all one, and this is a presupposition that can be highlighted in so many different ways scientifically that connect the phenomena going on in a fingernail between phenomena going on Mars, between phenomena that's going on throughout time. So we can connect and stitch the many particles, the many pieces of reality back into a very complex version, a very complex mathematical version of the whole. But initially, as we just feel separate, there's me and you, us and them, black and white. It's a very crude, a very unconscious form of consciousness, because it's just two. You went from the totality of everything, and now you've just got two things. It's very, very, very small. And the journey, the masculine journey of the conscious mind, is to cut the circle down into smaller and smaller bits. First mile, or kilometers, then you have meters, and then you have centimeters, and then you have millimeters. You just keep going down and down and down. Make the world smaller. Now, as you make the distinctions of the world smaller, the world appears to get bigger. In other words, if I have 1 meter and then go to a millimeter, there's now 1,000 millimeters. There was just 1 meter, but now that we're broken the meter into smaller and smaller bits, we've expanded consciousness through distinction, through language. We can now have a distinct, because if we just say this is a meter of tile, meter of marble, okay, there's a meter of marble. It's not a very high level of consciousness through the lens of language. But if we now have 1,000 millimeters of tile, we still have a meter of tile, but now we can look and say, oh, this bit of the marble is different from this bit, and this bit is different from this bit, and this bit has a curve going out of this bit of the millimeter over to this bit. So there's a relationship. These two things, you can invent numerology by studying the relationship of a meter of tile and looking, are there numbers that have particular threads relative to other numbers on this relationship of tile? And what about this? And what if that means? And what if this could be like this? You've expanded consciousness by increasing distinctions, but you're still in the land of illusion because you're expanding the symbol of reality. Consciousness is part of language, and language is a symbol of reality. It is not reality, but it can have an integrity in its correlation, in its symbology, or it can have a corruption. What happens to the bits of the self within holographic paradigm, within fractal patterns, we see that the particle is nested within the ecology and bears a fractal representation to aspects of the ecology in which it is nested. And so you could, if you watch the graphical interface of a fractal mathematical visual generator, you'll watch this little fern-shaped thing get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it fills the entire screen. And then in the center of that vast thing that's so big you cannot grasp it, you then see a little bit of a shape as another similar pattern emerges out of the center. So when the individual is a microcosm of the whole, and we study the whole, we could say we are studying ourself. We could say that we've invented language to explore a symbolic representation of ourselves that has something to do with a much deeper energy pattern that is too complex to grasp. Because sure, we may be able to train our minds to measure millimeters. And okay, you know, I can remember the number 737 millimeter, number 7,000. I can remember that. But can I remember, can I be conscious of a millionth of a millimeter? And can I look at the world through that lens without getting totally lost? In other words, if I have a magnifying glass that is so powerful that it takes a millionth of a millimeter and blows it up to a size where I can actually see it. Well, first of all, every movement of the telescope or the magnifying glass is a violent disruption of reality, because you move just a slight tremor and you've moved millions of millimeters. Because a millimeter here, a millimeter there, it's just millions of these things are just, it's like millions of objects going by in less than a second, and how can you track them? So then you clamp in this very tight object, so that the magnifying glass cannot move more than 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter at a given time. And of course that takes a lot of effort. And then you go in and you look there and you look at 1/1,000,000th of 1 millimeter of your carpet or your clothes. It's a whole world. You can make as much meaning as you want in that world. It's just at that magnification, to try and understand reality, reality becomes impossibly big as we look through finer and finer distinctions. And so what we do is we create approximations of reality. They're not reality. We create approximations of people, those types of people, stereotypes. Why do we invent them? Because it helps us cope with information overload, to actually see and be seen by another person in any meaningful way, mentally, emotionally, physically, logistically, financially, sexually, spiritually. To see and be seen by one person is an ordeal, because it can consume a lifetime of attention to capture and understand the complex relationships of a few minutes, in their finer points. So we can get lost in a moment. or we can be completely unaware of the moment and be aware of larger patterns. We can be unaware of the millimeter and paying attention to the meters. We can be unaware of the bigger picture and be lost in the smaller picture. Now, on the dimension of creating and sabotage, or creating and destruction, within the human psyche, there is polarity. Some part of us likes this, and some part of us does not. And the question is, what are the parts of us that are a yes to the system that we create and co-create, and what are the parts of us that are a no to the system? And remember, this is a system of thought and a system of language. We're not actually creating a system, we're imposing a system of consciousness to navigate a reality that is too complex to be conscious of. Because for the human mind to see consciousness, it's that awesome terror of obliteration, often referred to as to know God, to know the mind of God, to look through a kind of consciousness generator that sees all things throughout all time simultaneously through all perspectives simultaneously and identifies with it all. That's very similar in a fractally small pattern to the human body. We have that general sense as a human body, but we don't have it as a multiverse. As a human body, we have a general sense that the pain in my back that's bothering me here, and the slight something here that I'm not going to take the time to describe, and phenomena, the temperature, that it's all me. All of those different things. Now, of course, I'm not aware at the atomic level, and I'm not aware at different areas, but I identify with this shape. And if I was a cell in this hand, it would be very difficult to go from measuring the rhythm of the heartbeat and all the little particles flowing by me in the bloodstream, and to go from all that to suddenly being aware of that in the whole body. To perceive our relationship with the whole, with the one, requires us to a certain extent to transcend the system that we use to separate ourselves from the one through the illusion of language. Because how language separates everything is it gives distinct boxes to everything. And then the boxes are defined by their difference. So this is a box of fingers connected to this body, and you have a box of fingers connected to that body, and so my fingers are separate from yours. And in framing it that way, we fail to see the infinite vastness that's connecting to both sets, including we're both breathing the same air, which is keeping both patterns of energy alive. But because human consciousness cannot grasp the mind of God, because the mind of God is overwhelmingly dense, for the human ego to process. It's like trying to take the internet and have one computer stay up to speed processing the entire internet. It's just too many. It's too many distinctions. It's too many objects and particles broken down. The computer would fry. And so the human mind uses a system to perceive reality that is a dumbed down, simplified version of reality that doesn't fry its circuits. And those symbols of reality, language, we use to say that's reality, but it's not reality. And the trouble with dumbing down the system is exposed in a geometric analogy of the pentagram. So you take the sphere, the symbolic representation of everything, and you realize that you can't grasp the 10 billion, 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 billion bits to infinity in a single moment. It's just too much to grasp. So you say, okay, we're going to create a version of that totality that we can grasp. Let's have a five-sided shape here, and we'll put that on the circle. And now, rather than looking at all those bits at all those dimensions and all those little distinctions, we'll just have a five-sided system, a five-part system. And so we now have five little boxes. We divide our life into five boxes. We're going to have a work box. Oh, you called me because Mr. Smith liked my shoe polish? Well, you go in the work box, but this isn't the time for the work box. I have a schedule in which this is my work. I have from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's the box where my time goes to work. So I'll call you back in those hours, and I put you over in that box over here. And then this is my box to beat myself up in the absence of self-love in a psychologically illiterate cult. So I'll put, I have another hateful thought about how terrible I am. Let me put that here. I'll savor that with my wine later. There's a box for that. And there's a box over here for my goals, whatever it is. It's a five-part system. And now that I have my nice little system, I put these things in my box, and I put these things in my box, and I put these things. But it's a very simple system. And the trouble is, not all of us fits into the box. There's a knock on the door. What's that? That doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. Someone shouldn't be knocking on that door. Why don't you knock at one of the other five doors? And it says, no, I don't fit in the box that you've created. I don't fit in this box. I don't fit in this box. I don't even fit on the dimensions you've created to put your boxes in. I'm not on that dimension, and I'm not in that box. But I have a connection to you. Now, this is the crisis of the soul, because the soul doesn't fit into the box. The soul may be a beggar. The soul may be a genius who also rapes children. The soul may be an unsolvable mathematical problem that defies the system. The self that is the larger self comes knocking, and it doesn't fit into the box. And this is the crisis of every human being, because now the human ego, who is the pattern of identity that fits in the box, now the human ego has to decide whether to murder, to exterminate, to block out, to dishonor the larger self that's trying to come in, or acknowledge that the boxes created don't fit the complexity of life and disband the system, exposing the ego to the chaos of the unknown, to the awe of the divine, which cannot be processed in language. It's a crisis, because the identity of the ego is created to manage the wheel of life in a crude, systemic manner that it can take responsibility for. And out there is this knock on the door. And this knock on the door isn't fitting into the system. It cannot fit into the system. It is the crisis. It is the crucible. It is the challenge to acknowledge the flaw in the system, to begin opening up some of the boxes. It is the divinity in the cracked pot. The tear in the fabric where the light comes in. You have to protect the individual identity from the awesomeness of God, because the individual identity cannot process it. You have to create a cult, a system of some degree of complexity that we are capable of managing. And then we must meet ourselves as the other, as the one outside the system that is connected to us in a dishonored protocol, that is connected to us in a dishonored protocol that wants to come in but does not fit the paradigm. And that is the point where we murder our soul, or let the system come to life by bending, by weaving, by becoming more complex, more fluid. And in the gentleness of the dance and the dissolving of the system that is ultimately a lie, we find that the one sabotaging the simple, tight-knit version of egoic perfection is the one carrying the torch into the beautiful darkness of the unknown, into the landscape of her chaos, her majesty. That the one breaking down the door is the one unwilling to give up on the beauty of an interconnected and sustainable ecology that does not fit into the box. And so enemy pivots to take the place of ally. And we see that our tidy boxes that we clung to for so long that rescued our egos so gracefully have been imprisoning our magnificence, our grace, with the viciousness of a small animal consuming something divine. And death becomes birth. Out becomes in. Symbol becomes substance. And the dance begins again in a new fractal representation of reality, in which there is an awareness that is not reality, but a symbol for reality. And the dance begins again.